stories to tell in the dark.
Welcome, my pleasurable audience, to another episode of Phantom Reads. On this episode, we take a look at 5 short stories from the collection called Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I hope you find this week's episode pleasing, because, believe me, it's going to be one fine ride. Let's begin. Number 1. The Girl Who Stood on a Grave. Some boys and girls were at a party one night. There was a graveyard down the street, and they were talking about how scary it was. "Don't ever stand on a grave after dark," one of the boys said. "The person inside will grab you. He'll pull you under." "That's not true," one of the girls said. "It's just a superstition." "I'll give you $1 if you stand on a grave," said the boy. "A grave doesn't scare me," went the girl. "I'll do it right now." The boy handed her his knife. "Stick this knife in one of the graves," he said. "Then we'll know you were in there." The graveyard was filled with shadows and was as quiet as death itself. "There's nothing to be scared of," the girl told herself. But she was scared anyway. She picked out a grave and stood on it. Then quickly she bent over and plunged the knife into the soil. And she started to leave. But what's this? She couldn't get away. Something was holding her back. She tried a second time to leave, and she couldn't move. She was filled with terror. Something's got me! Help! She screamed, and she fell to the ground. When she didn't come back, the others went to look for her. They found her body sprawled across the grave. Without realizing it, she had plunged the knife through her skirt and had pinned it to the ground. It was only the knife that held her. She had died of fright. Number 2. A New Horse. 2 farmhands shared a room. One slept at the back of the room, the other slept near the door. After a while, the one who slept near the door began to feel very tired early in the day. His friend asked what the reason was and what was wrong. "An awful thing happens every night. A witch turns me into a horse and rides me all over the countryside." "I'll sleep in your bed tonight," his friend said. "We'll see what happens to me." About midnight, an old woman who lived nearby came into the room. She mumbled some strange words over the farmhand, and he found he couldn't move. Then she slipped a bridle on him, and he turned into a horse. The next thing he knew, she was riding him across the field at breakneck speed, beating him to make him go even faster. Soon, they came to a house where a party was going on. There was a lot of music and dancing. They were having a big time inside. She hitched him to a fence and went in. While she was gone, the farmhand rubbed against the fence until the bridle came off, and he turned back into a human being. Then, he went into the house and found the witch. He spoke those same strange words over her, and with a bridle he turned her into a horse. Then, he rode her to a blacksmith and had her fitted with horseshoes. After that, he rode her to the farm where she lived. "See here, I've got a pretty good filly here," he told her husband, "but I need a stronger horse. Would you like to trade?" The old man looked her over, and he said he would do it. So they picked out another horse, and the farmhand rode away. Her husband led his new horse to the barn. He took off the bridle and went to hang it up. But when he came back, the new horse was gone. Instead, there stood his wife, with horseshoes nailed to her hands and feet. Number 3. Room for one more. a man named Joseph Blackwell came to Philadelphia on a business trip. He stayed with friends in the big house they owned outside the city. That night, they had a good time visiting. But when Blackwell came to bed, he tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. Sometime during the night, he heard a car turn into the driveway. He went to the window to see who was arriving at such a late hour. In the moonlight, he saw a long black hearse filled with people. The driver of the hearse looked up at him, and Blackwell saw his queer, hideous face. He shuddered. The driver called to him, "There is room for one more." Then he waited for a minute or two, and he drove off. In the morning, Blackwell told his friends what had happened. "You were dreaming," they said. "I must have been," he said, "but it did not feel like a dream." After breakfast, he went into Philadelphia. He spent the day high above the city in one of the new office buildings there. Late in the afternoon, he was waiting for an elevator to take him back down to the street. But when it arrived, it was very crowded. One of the passengers, very queer looking, reached out to him and called him. Sir, there's room for one more. Would you like to go?" he said. No, thank you," said Blackwell. I'll just get the next one." The doors closed, and the elevator started down. What is this?" Blackwell shuddered. There was shrieking and screaming, and then the sound of a crash. The elevator had fallen to the bottom of the shaft. Nobody survived. Nobody. Number 4. The Wendigo. A wealthy man wanted to go hunting in a part of northern Canada where very few people had ever hunted. He traveled to a trading post and tried to find a guide to take him, but no one would do it. It was too dangerous, they said. Finally, he found an Indian who needed money badly, and he agreed to take him. The Indian's name was Defago. They made camp in the snow near a large frozen lake. For 3 days they hunted, but they had nothing to show for it. The third night, a windstorm came up. They lay in their tent, listening to the wind howling and the trees whipping back and forth. To see the storm better, the hunter opened the tent flap. What he saw startled him. There wasn't a breath of air stirring, and the trees were standing perfectly still. Yet, he could hear the wind howling. And the more he listened, the more it sounded as if it were calling Defago's name. Defago, it called. Defago. I must be losing my mind, the hunter thought. But Defago had gotten out of his sleeping bag. He was huddled in a corner of the tent, his head buried in his arms. Defago? What's this all about? The hunter asked. It's nothing, Defago said, visibly shaken. But the wind seemed to call him, steadily gaining momentum, and Defago became more tense and more restless. Defago, it called.
Defago.
With this, suddenly, Defago jumped to his feet, and he began to run from the tent. But the hunter grabbed him and wrestled him to the ground. You can't leave me out here, he said. Then the wind called again, and Defago broke loose and ran into the darkness. The hunter could hear him screaming as he went. Again and again he cried, Oh, My fiery feet, my burning feet of fire. And his voice faded away, and the wind died down. At daybreak, the hunter followed Defago's tracks in the snow. They went through the woods, down towards the lake, and then out onto the ice. But soon he noticed something strange. The steps Defago had taken steadily got longer and longer. They were so long, no human being could have taken them. It was as if something had helped him to hurry away. The hunter followed the tracks out to the middle of the lake, but there they disappeared. At first, he thought that Defago had fallen through the ice, but there wasn't any hole. Then he thought that something had pulled him off the ice into the sky, but that made no sense. As he stood wondering what had happened, the wind picked up again. Soon, it was howling as it had the night before. Then he heard Defago's voice. It was coming from above, and again he heard Defago screaming, "My fiery feet, my burning feet." But there was nothing to be seen. Now, the hunter wanted to leave that place as fast as he could. He went back to camp and packed. There, he left some food for Defago, and he started out. Weeks later, he reached civilization. The following year, he went back to hunt in that area again. He went to the same trading post to look for a guide. The people there could not explain what had happened to Defago that night, but they had not seen him since. "Maybe it was the Wendigo," one of them said, and he laughed. "It's supposed to come with the wind. It drags you along at great speed until your feet are burned away, and more of you than that. Then it carries you into the sky, and it drops you. It's just a crazy story, but that's what some of the Indians say." A few weeks later, the hunter was at the trading post again. An Indian came in and sat by the fire. He had a blanket wrapped around him. Odd. And he wore this giant hat so that you couldn't see his face. The hunter thought there was something eerily familiar about him. He walked over and asked, Are you Defago?" The Indian didn't answer. Do you know anything about someone called Defago? Can you tell me something about Defago?" Still no answer. Now he began to wonder if something was wrong, if the man needed help, but he couldn't see his face. Are you all right?" he asked, scared. No answer. To get a good look at him, he lifted the Indian's hat. And then he screamed. There was nothing under the hat but a pile of ashes. Number 5. The Hook. Donald and Sarah went to the movies. Then they went for a ride in Donald's car. They parked up on a hill at the edge of town. From there, they could see the lights up and down the alley. Donald turned on the radio and found some music, but an announcer broke in with a news bulletin. A murderer had escaped the state prison. He was armed with a knife and was headed south on foot. His left hand was missing. In its place, he wore a hook. "Let's roll up the windows and lock the doors," said Sarah. "That's a good idea," said Donald. "That prison isn't too far away," said Sarah. "Maybe we should really go home." Donald had something to say on that matter. "It's only 10 o'clock, Sarah. Don't worry." "I don't care what time it is, Donald," she said. "I want to go home." "Look, Sarah," said Donald. He's not going to climb all the way up here. Why would he do that? Even if he did, all the doors are locked. How could he get in? Donald? He could take that hook and break through a window and open a door, she said. I'm scared, Donald. I want to go home. Donald, now annoyed, showed his grimace. Girls are always afraid of something. Jeez. As he started the car, Sarah thought she heard something, or someone scratching at the door. Did you hear that? She asked as they roared away. It sounded like somebody was trying to get in. Oh, sure, said Donald. Soon, they got to her house. Would you like to come in and have some cocoa? She asked, still shaking. No, Donald said. I don't feel like it. I'm going home. Donald was still annoyed at Sarah's sudden fright. But he went out. He went outdoors, found his car, and went around to its side. He wanted to let her out and also check what was that noise. What made that scratching noise on his car? This was his favorite. He went around to the other side and found that hanging on the door handle was a hook. Thank you for tuning in to this week's Phantom Reads. I hope you've enjoyed your presence. I'll be back next week with another 5 scary tales to tell in the dark. Until then, this is Frantic Phantom. Goodbye, folks.